Hello again, and welcome to Digging Deeper, YEG's Urban Development Chat, brought to you by Clarity Development Advisory. I'm Dave Onishenko.
Hi everyone, I'm Rainan Sones.
And this is episode 3. This is our third time doing this. We're excited to have you. If you're new to this, a couple things. So one, we're doing this live. We're also posting this on YouTube after. So live, put comments up in the live chat, and we can, we want this to be interactive if you're watching here. And then put comments afterwards too, and we'll follow up with them in future conversations.
Yeah, and hopefully we're more with it today, because I think last time we were on this, we were in the midst of 3 pre-application meetings that day, some other stuff, some development proposals, and everything else. So we were running between things, and feels a little more relaxed today. Feels like we're well prepared, and
beautiful day outside.
Beautiful day.
A hot, sunny summer day here in Edmonton. Yeah. So thanks again for joining us. And as I said before, we're looking for sponsors, local business where we can showcase some of your product. Let us know. Send us a message, and we'd be happy to feature your product on our show. Coffee, microbreweries, anything and everything in between. So, Rainan, what's our first topic today? What are we chatting about?
Well, my notes say trees.
So we're going to talk about trees.
We're going to talk about trees, which are an interesting area of conversation, particularly with the amount of central redevelopment, infill development in Edmonton and other Western Canadian cities right now. Edmonton being well known for our existing urban tree canopy.
Oh, absolutely. You just have to look out of our window here of our office. We're up on the 24th floor here downtown. You can oversee the river valley and the mature neighborhoods, and it's a huge, beautiful canopy of trees. So that's an asset of Edmonton. I love that. I love seeing that bloom in the spring from, the barren trees.
Absolutely.
And so they're valuable. And the city, so much so that they've talked about, assigning dollar values. And I don't have it in front of me, and I don't know off the top of my head, but based on the size of the tree, caliper of the tree, there's different dollar values, and there's billions
age, maturity
of dollars.
of trees. You're looking at. I mean, if I want to go and cut one of these down to facilitate a development proposal, I could be looking at a $60,000 bill or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the big ones are very valuable. So the city's gone and they've inventoried every public tree, right? They've GPS tagged and located them, and they even have it up on their website. I mean, we can show some of that now, what that kind of looks like. So here's just a neighborhood, and it shows kind of your boulevard trees and a mix of trees, and there's everything from probably species and caliper, but details about everything. Even the small spindly trees behind my place in the public park are located, and age and caliper and value. So that's it's great way to track, because this is an asset that we all as Edmontonians share. We share it together, right?
And whether you think of it as an asset or not, I mean, it if you spend time in mature neighborhoods of Edmonton, you maybe even unknowingly appreciate that. And it's
100%.
things, it's shade to just the general sort of biophilic nature of the city to just that feeling of established neighborhoods. You can really get a different sense when you walk into a 1945 neighborhood with 70-some-year-old trees versus a 15-year-old neighborhood where the trees are about a quarter of the size still.
And it's interesting. The city over the past 20 years has made a transition where there's implementation of boulevard trees on a lot of the collector roads in new neighborhoods, which is great. Anywhere where you have kind of your front walk, and they've done that, boulevards throughout. So that's a good addition to see. It was funny. I remember growing up, my mom loved neighborhoods with big trees, and we were building in the suburbs a new house, and she wanted to go petition all the neighbors to plant an elm tree in their front yard, so you could over time mimic the canopy that some of these mature neighborhoods had. But it's great. I love it. Great asset, good thing to have. So what is the city talking about right now? Because there's a couple conversations around trees, tree preservation, both public and private. Where are we at with that?
Well, actually, before we even get to that, I'm going to skip down a little on our list and start with what the city's hoping to achieve And
Great.
And the first thing that the city is hoping to achieve right now, and this is through the new city plan and some of the conversations that are currently happening with council. The city is looking to plant an additional 2 million trees by
Wow.
2050.
Okay. So a bit of time.
There's a little bit of time. I don't know how many of those will survive, or whether they're talking about 2 million living trees or what. But
Okay.
2021, 22, you've got 6,000 new trees on public land,
Okay,
expanding the urban forest, and that's just intended to escalate. Now, I'm not sure all the measures by which they'll be able to actually do this, where they're hoping to locate, but it's an interesting comment, I suppose, by the city, saying that there is value to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they're looking at this from a few different perspectives, from kind of your climate resilience perspective,
Mm-hmm.
talking about prevention of soil erosion,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what are some of the other things that we're thinking about? I don't want to
Well,
talk
I
the
mean,
whole time.
there's the amenities and the beautification.
Yeah.
There's, species habitat. There's
Mm-hmm.
a wide variety of things. And if we had a tree expert on here, I'm sure we'd learn a whole bunch
Mm-hmm.
of things of the value of urban forest preventing heat island effect.
Yes,
in
that's
some
the one I was
cases
gonna
too,
mention.
especially in the
Yep.
summertime. In the wintertime, the leaves are off the trees. It allows some of that nice passive light.
Mm-hmm.
But like right now, on a really hot day like today, I'm thankful for some of those mature trees in my neighborhood
Yes.
that are going to prevent some of that sun, the afternoon sun, from
Mm-hmm.
baking in the windows and heating up the house. So there's a lot of value to that. 2 million, that's a lot, and you've started to see some of that in some of these boulevards of older arterial roads and
Yep.
stuff. And it's great. Our growing season is short, so it takes
Mm-hmm.
time for these to develop, unlike places like, say, Austin,
Yeah.
places like that.
Florida, where
Yeah,
you're
just
putting up a tree and
rapidly.
it's next year it's full sized.
So
Yeah.
what's the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The next best time is today, right?
Sure.
Or no, the best time was 20 years ago. The next best time is today.
Yeah.
So you got to take action, and it's good that they're doing this, and there's value in this. But so they want to expand it, but there's also talk about preservation
Yeah.
of public, but also private. So let's start with public.
Yep.
What happens right now with public trees in terms of if there's development nearby? What did the city just approve? What happened here?
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about something that's, again, it's a newer conversation. It's an infill development conversation. It's not really an issue 15 or 20 years ago. It wasn't
Yeah.
something we were thinking about. But when you're going to develop a new, I don't know, a single family, a multifamily, even a commercial type infill development, and there's a boulevard tree on the other side of the sidewalk, the city is saying, well, we need some sort of protective mechanism for that.
Okay.
And we all know how trees have roots, and development can affect that through
Sure.
the digging of your parkade or basement or anything like that. So what are the measures that...
Well, so it says
being
if there's
taken?
any work done within 5 meters of a boulevard or open space tree, or within 10 meters of a natural tree stand, that you need a tree protection plan drawn up.
Mm-hmm.
So does this differ than, say, we've seen in some infill cases over the past, say, 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
where there's been little fences put up around boulevard trees? Is this the next step?
This is the next step, yeah.
Okay.
This is additional to that. And so, yeah, that was something that came up. That was kind of the first line of defense that they thought of.
Yeah.
We need to, because people are rolling heavy equipment through
Sure.
to be able to do their project. And you were seeing this across the city, and I mean, we are in the development industry, and we know this to be true.
Yeah.
Trees were getting ruined, and this was a great protective mechanism. I know it's challenging,
Yeah.
and it's costly for developers, or it's
Sure.
even just something that you have to add to your scope of work.
Yeah. And where you can preserve mature trees, I mean, we've seen tower development downtown, for example, where they tear down a boulevard tree,
Yep.
and they plant a really small caliper tree
Yeah.
when they're done.
Yeah.
And I understand it's difficult for site access and everything else when you've got these big trees in the way, but sometimes there's value, and you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. there's a good example that we'll show here. This is Beljan Station Park development, just north of the old train station on Gateway Boulevard. And this is a public tree. And you can see how it's fenced off and preserved. So obviously, they've gone through this process. They see it as a valuable asset. That's great. You need to do your cost-benefit analysis. This is public, so I guess they have to protect it in this case. But in terms of what works and what doesn't, sometimes you can, the city works through your tree preservation plan and it says it's unfeasible for us to preserve this because of what we're doing, but we'll plant something after with a new soil cell that'll promote better growth, all this. So,
well, these are complicated questions because we're talking about what is the health of that tree? What is the lifespan of that tree as well? Are we restricting potential development for something that is 5 years left in its lifespan?
Yeah.
And so these are really complicated, and that's where I like what you said there about figuring out the value, right? Like what are the different characteristics and values that you have to think about? And I know some of our clients, for instance, they really consider those trees to be an asset as opposed to a detractor. There's something that can really make the site or your development that much more attractive.
Yeah.
And tons of people talk about this, right? Like what is the reason somebody wants to live in a mature neighborhood? Oh, it's the tree canopy. I want to have that tree canopy. It's awesome. I love it. And so there is some degree of value to that, whether it's, I don't know how you model that financially, but it is there, certainly.
100%.
And I believe that there are steps that you can take to where it's viable to do so, to do some degree of at least public tree protection. But what about private property?
And there we go.
Yeah.
That's the question. Because I see value in this. There's additional layers here. Tree protection plan they're talking about. Okay, find the balance. Make sure that there's support from the city admin side to expedite this process, that it doesn't get bogged up with a lack of staff to be able to monitor this. Because that's a concern for our development friends as well.
Certainly.
You have to fill this out. Now you're waiting how long for your tree protection plan to be approved. So there needs to be the give and take on both sides. Now, for the private property, that's the question. So the city's looking at 3 different options right now, and they've been tasked to come back in the first quarter of administration to go back to council, first quarter of 2023, to talk about this. Option 1, requiring a permit for the removal of trees or a tree preservation plan on private property. 2, regulating trees through a zoning bylaw, so tree removal would be tied directly to a development permit.
Yes.
And 3, the city would provide incentives for preserving existing trees. So there's a couple, they used examples, Ottawa, Toronto, Surrey, that have some of this ongoing right now where permits are required for removing a tree on private land. But talk us through that a bit. What are your thoughts on this? What are some of the benefits? What are some of the complications, do you think?
Well, the benefits are obvious in terms of finding ways to preserve, again, some of that urban forest. Whether it's public or private, nobody's really thinking about that when they're going through their neighborhood. A tree is a tree.
Yeah.
And
it's on the front yard, it's casting shadows, sure.
Yeah. So I think we understand the value of that, but the challenge is more so how does this and before we get into some of those individual scenarios, I think how does this as a whole impact development from the siting of what you're trying to do and everything else? Well, it's challenging, right? Like you've got a gigantic tree 10 feet into your front yard, and you're trying to build a duplex or something like that.
Yeah.
What do? Do you tear it down or do you build a tiny little duplex? What's your call?
Well, I mean, again, this is like we're thinking through a lens of smaller lots. Imagine, bigger lots. Imagine rural lots within city boundaries too. So there's, we see examples in suburban development within the city, for example, where you have tree stands, and that's part of something that's protected as, environmental reserve or municipal reserve, and there's value in that. So there's ways that it can be engineered to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
You got water flow and all that other stuff. I guess the question is, say you've got a big backyard and you've got some dead trees or some deadfall, or you want to do some landscaping, take down a tree, plant some more. Does this become a bureaucratic barrier now? And now, you're waiting 6 weeks for someone from forestry to come out to take a look at this tree you want to take down, or a dead tree you want to prune.
Yeah.
How does that work? And it's something that's completely on your land that, may or may not have impact on neighbors.
I mean, to throw my own lens into it, I think this is where the value of incentive is, as opposed to regulation, because again, it is your private property, right? Yeah. And it's hard to determine whether people will even follow that. We don't have a registry of every tree on private property. We don't have that type of information. How do you verify these things? How does the city actually manage this? It's not going to be easy. I can promise you that. So, I mean, looking at the various scenarios that we have, Dave mentioned the first one, private tree bylaw that would regulate trees on private property. To just start with that one, some of the challenges that the city themselves have discussed are increases in fees and permits for development and redevelopment timelines, regulatory complexity, more staffing resources, increased burden on infill developers. Yeah. And so that's where you're seeing this sort of lack of alignment between infill development goals and sort of this urban forest goal. And you kind of have to find a way to balance those out, because both are important as per our underlying sort of city plan document that we have now. Both are important. Where do you find that balance?
Exactly. And so we have a question here in the chat, and this is what my next question was going to be. What's a reasonable incentive for homeowners or developers to keep these trees on private property? How can you incentivize it? So could it be, let's say for a developer, maybe it's an expedited permit process, or a reduced permit fees perhaps. Maybe there is I don't know.
Maybe that can play into things like variances as well, like in terms of the siting of your development. If you're allowing for preservation of trees, that some of your setbacks can be changed to help facilitate that, and so on.
I mean, monetary is kind of the first place you go. You try to think of that. But if you're thinking, say, an existing homeowner who wants to tear down a tree to do landscaping, they don't have a development permit, for example, to do any of that stuff. They're not looking to have a variance in their setback. But can that be monetary? Could it be a temporary reduction of property tax incentivizing what? To keep a tree?
That seems incredibly complex.
Well, and I don't think that works. It's a burden that the city shares. Then you start reducing.
Well, it's a burden the city shares, but on the flip side, it's also supposed to be a value that the city has, and a value to the neighborhood. So maybe you're actually onto something there.
But I mean, maybe it's more at the development process, because what stops me from saying I'm going to tear down this tree, and the city says, well, if you don't tear it down, we'll give you a reduction in property tax. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I found a loophole. I'm going to threaten to tear down a tree every year then. And like if it's tied to a development project, I can see maybe there a way for incentivization, that carrot to work. Yeah. But if it's just individual homeowner, hey, I want to tear down this tree because I want to expand my yard, I want to plant a garden. I don't know. I'm not sure. There might, if you've got ideas, both in the chat and in the comments after, we'd love to hear it from you. And the city may come back with a report about what can be done from incentivization if that is a route that they choose. Yeah. The last thing that I think that any Edmontonian would want is some Big Brother Orwellian approach that has mapping of all the trees, and you get a fine mailed to you now because they did their mapping and noticed one of the trees on your lot is now gone, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No. So if there's something that we value collectively, that we collectively benefit from as a city, and we talked about everything from soil erosion and tree canopy heat island and habitat for species, all these things. what can we do to incentivize, preserve, protect
Mm-hmm.
that is publicly ours, but I don't know, maybe encourage planting of new trees. How about that? Rather than about tearing down. What if there's voucher programs for the city or discounts or something?
Yeah,
to
or a
plant new
replacement
trees?
program when
Yeah.
you're removing something, you can get kind of that voucher for replanting two in its place or something like that, and
Totally.
going from there. But I'd love to hear about our topic too.
Let's move on to that. We've talked a lot about trees, as you said. Topic 2 is sunset clauses. So a sunset clause is language to reduce development rights after a period of time. And so this has largely been implemented within direct control zones within Edmonton. And when there's been significant change from a standard zone or significant lift in density or height or floor area ratio or whatever else, this was approved to start being used in February 2016.
Yeah.
And so far, so the city has put in 43 direct control zones, a sunset clause that would limit development typically through a reduction of height or FAR, floor area ratio, after a time period's elapsed. So 10 years is kind of the standard.
Yeah.
So how does this work? What happens? How do I lose my development rights, or do I lose them, or what happens?
So basically what happens is in the DC, whether that's a DC1, DC2 type zone, there would be regulations, and maybe we can pull those up. Yeah, here we go. In your regulations, you've got kind of the maximum height, maximum floor area ratio that you're allowed to build, and the sunset clause is going to say after 10 years, if you haven't effectively developed that lot, here are your new regulations, here are your new maximums. So maybe instead of being able to build a 90-meter tower with a floor area ratio of 9, maybe now it's brought down to something that resembles an RA8 zone, so maybe like a FAR of 3 and a height of 23, 25, something like that.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, you see this in a variety of different direct control zones in Edmonton today, and that's something that many of our direct control projects have included. It's largely, would you say it's largely on relevant more so to kind of the tower projects and things like that?
I think so. It's specifically, we've seen it more so in projects that have a large variation from a standard zone or a significant increase in height or something like I said. We really won't know where this is. There are a couple. There's one that we worked on a little while ago here that was about to lapse. And
before we get to lapsing, though,
sure,
let's talk a little bit. What's the purpose of this? What is the city trying to do? We're saying they're trying to do with the sunset clause idea.
Right. I think they're trying to reduce speculation, first and foremost. We saw that about 20 years ago, there's a lot of speculation on direct control zones in the downtown area, trying to rezone and flip it, get an increase in value. But they're also trying to incentivize timely construction.
Yeah.
And this is their words. So thinking that, hey, if we put the sunset clause on, it's going to create an impetus for the developer to start construction within this period of time, or else lose their development rights.
Does that work?
Well, to the developers we've spoke to, the answer is no. And we haven't seen this play out, but a lot of times if they haven't made that decision, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on planning and architecture and engineering to create a direct control zone to build their tower or whatever else. If they haven't pressed go in that first couple of years, there's probably a lot of other factors at play, market conditions, capital conditions, who knows. So at 10 years' time, to lose their development rights, are they concerned? Probably not, because they're probably having to rezone anyways.
Correct. As
market conditions have changed, as their ambitions have changed.
Who knows if the people who are managing that project or even on that team anymore know the intention behind what they had proposed initially? Maybe not. Yeah, so, why are we bringing this up right now? What's going on?
Well, the city is looking at it, and they're trying to see the effectiveness of it. it won't really be well understood until about 2026, when a lot of these 10-year windows start to end. So the city won't have a full perspective of this until that time.
So have any of these actually been like done yet? Have they lapsed at all?
Well, there's the one example again that we had worked on for a client at the Healy Ford site, for example, too. Right? That was, I don't know if it has or was about to, but we had taken a look at it about a year and a half ago.
I might be wrong about this, but I think none of them have lapsed at this point in time.
So that was maybe forthcoming. Either way, the other question is too, if you're in a position as a developer where you're going to be selling this now, doesn't matter that much if this. I mean, because at the end of the day, you're selling a very specific direct control zone. Most developers don't want to build something that's so specific that was envisioned by another developer who had a different vision for the site, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's lapsed or not. Or does, Rain and Stone's construction, do you see this now as, hey, the city of Edmonton has been favorable in some of these areas where I'm going to buy this land to allow for development rights, and I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board anyway. It doesn't matter if it's lapsed or not.
Yeah, like is it the city's perspective now that they don't want that kind of density? Is that kind of the idea?
That's a question. I'm not sure.
So effectively, to me, I mean the idea of a city council approving a specific floor area ratio and a height says that this is an appropriate use of that land in the long run, not for the next 10 years, in the long run.
Great point.
So putting a sunset clause on it says that no, we're letting this developer do this right now. We're letting them do it right now, but we got to revisit this in a little while.
Right.
And that just seems wrong to me. Like when we're talking about land use, we're talking about impactful type changes to our built environment around us, and we should be thinking in the long run, not about what we want tomorrow in terms of development, right?
Well, I mean, inherently, you're granting land rights that you say this land is suitable for this development. And that's, when it's presented in front of council and the bylaw is created, they're saying, yes, this is suitable for this. Yeah. As you said, suitable for a period of time? No. The city's even said that isn't their motivation. Yeah. The motivation is to incentivize construction, or attempt to incentivize, because they haven't seen it work necessarily, or know from any feedback. Yeah. And two, to reduce speculation from someone building something and flipping or whatever else. I don't know if there's been a strong answer to give credence to either of those being true yet. And I mean, we'll know a little bit more in a couple of years after a full evaluation of this.
Yeah. I mean, the city's current report that they brought to, I think it was the Urban Planning Committee a little while ago here, effectively says that to date they don't have evidence that it's working, but they're going to keep watching and seeing by, like you said, 2026, whether they think that it's working at that point in time. But we'll see how that kind of goes. But just bringing it back here a little bit, the reason that this is important here, and an important part of the conversation too, is that in Edmonton, at least to this point in time, we really haven't had higher density zones other than direct controls that have worked, that industry has been able and willing to make work. So we've had challenges with RA9, for example. Honestly, not many developments have happened under RA9. Yeah. So a lot of people have been kind of pushed that DC route for a little bit more flexibility, or whether that's a little more height or anything like that. And then you're adding on that requirement of a sunset clause. So you're playing two different games here, if you ask me, right?
Well, I would wonder, and I'd pose to the developer, does it matter then? Yeah. Or is this a card that they're willing to give, the city, but it really doesn't matter in the end because they either want to build it, which the majority of, our
when they're going through
do.
the project,
Absolutely.
They usually want to. Yeah.
Or if it comes to that point, I'm going to be rezoning it anyways, so it doesn't matter. Interesting. What do you guys think? Offer your feedback, offer your comments. We'd love to hear from you, like I said, either live or in the comments afterwards. This was great.
This has been fun.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the next time we do this with some other comments and some new topics that we talk about. Have ideas about things you'd like us to talk about? We're happy to get feedback. Send us an email to our website, or subscribe and offer comments in this video feed.
If you have something you'd love to talk about too, join us.
Yeah,
Come
absolutely.
down.
Sounds good. All right, thanks again, Raymond, for the chat, and thanks everyone who's chimed in here. We will, tackle this again here in 2 weeks' time.
Looks like we've got something for next time, which is
good.
Our wish list for the upcoming budget, please, from Bleed Orange and Blue 69.
That's great. Well,
that's awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll maybe make a note of that and see what we can do next time. Thanks again. You guys have been fantastic. This has been Digging Deeper, YEG's Urban Development Chat, brought to you by Clarity Development Advisory. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks' time.
See you next time.